do I think that we are going to get PR in the next Parliament? I'm afraid I say my instinct is to say probably not, sadly. I think a lot is going to depend on what happens at the next election and what the results are. I think from people who want PR's point of view, actually, we don't want a Labour landslide. We would rather have it a bit sort of near to the knuckle. Because I think one of the main problems and the main obstacles to getting PR in the UK is the fact that the Tories and Labour have a monopoly on power. And I don't think either party, certainly there will be factions within the Labour Party who do want to shift to PR. I've never seen anyone on the right, apart from UKIP and Reform, but certainly within the Conservative Party, I've never seen anybody within the Conservative Party say that they want PR. So I think we are all expecting a big change, a big sea change, and that there's going to be a Labour government. But if they have an absolutely stonking majority, why on earth are they going to want to give up their power to any other party? It's not going to happen. Which is a great shame, because I mean, for me, one of the big issues about PR is it just represents better representation to me. I always think whenever I'm explaining how our first past the post system is so bad, because I always think people understand things better if they can visualize something. And I always say, right, okay, imagine there's a polling station in a village, and there's 100 people live in that village. And imagine a long table where all the votes have been counted out and they're sitting on this table, and 35 people in the village have voted for the Conservative and 65 people have voted for other parties. And what happens when they're deciding who is the winner is that someone puts an arm down the table and just shoves all of those 65 votes into a bin. And that's our system. We basically, the only votes that count in this country are the votes that are for the winner. And that, I don't think, is democratic.
So to respond, because I agree on some bits and I disagree on others, which makes it a more interesting conversation, I suppose. I think I definitely don't disagree fundamentally with anything you just said. I think I'm slightly more hopeful, I suppose, and my kind of basis for that hope is in all the years I've been campaigning for PR, which has been my whole political life. I felt like I've never heard so many people talking about it, and people often say you never hear about PR on the doorsteps or in communities. But actually, more and more, one, that isn't true. I do directly hear people talking about electoral reform, but two, even where they don't use the words electoral reform, they talk about trust in politics, and they're all the same. And you're increasingly seeing people unhappy with both the Conservative and Labour Party. So I do feel like there's that real wish and hope for something different. On the people on the right campaigning for PR, there are a few Conservatives. So I'm elected in the London Assembly, one of the few places where we actually use proportional representation in the UK, along with obviously Holyrood in Scotland, and increasingly in Wales. And Emma Best, who's one of the Conservative Assembly members, has been an advocate for PR. And I'd like to think that's because when you've worked within a PR system,
yeah, exactly. I was going to say it's interesting that within the London Assembly system, and that in London there are Conservatives who want PR. I mean, of course, because London skews towards Labour and Green constantly. So I can absolutely understand why Conservatives within London would magically be interested in PR, because it would mean they would get more seats.
So I think it's partly that, but I'd also like to think that when you've had the experience of working in a system where people do actually have to compromise and negotiate, and there's not that fear of coalitions or working together, because that's fundamentally how London politics works. You have to work across party. You get less of the tribalism that's encouraged by first past the post. But yes, I'm sure there's other reasons for it too. The thing that worries me more than anything with all of this is I do fear that the Labour Party would have genuinely rather take a Conservative government again over having proportional representation, because there's a feeling if they just wait their turn, power will come back to them again. And so it's just really important that those voices in Labour who are pro proportional representation, which is getting bigger and bigger and bigger, become more vocal to ultimately say it can't be just about getting the Tories out. It has to be
Yeah,
about a
I
genuinely
agree.
democratic system for the future.
I mean, it would be. I mean, I think if Labour are sensible, they will look at the awful in tray that they're about to face if they come into power at the next election, and it will be horrendous. And I don't think they will be in any position to drastically improve people's lives in one term. And you can see it already, can't you, come the next election, that people will, that the Tories will be blaming Labour for all the problems that they sowed. And it's entirely possible that we could have a one-term Labour government and that's it. And then we're back to the Tories again. However,
Absolutely.
if Labour introduce PR in this next in this next parliament, then the likelihood of that happening it reduces dramatically. Because I do fundamentally think that we are predominantly a left and left of centre nation. I think we are predominantly a progressive nation. I think we are predominantly a tolerant nation. And I think one of the greatest problems that we have had is that the most vocal and the loudest sort of voices in the room, certainly in the lead up to Brexit and post Brexit, have been the people who are not progressive. And they have skewed things, I think, quite dramatically. You know, I mean, you know, I was very anti-Brexit. Weirdly, I don't think Brexit would have happened if we had PR. I think one of the reasons for Brexit was this whole notion of communities and people that felt unheard. And I think if you feel that you have a parliament that represents you, then you are less likely to feel um, disenfranchised or feel that you are somebody who is an outlier to the rest of society. So I often hear the argument from people, especially on the left, actually, saying, well, you know, if we had PR, then you'd let UKIP in, you'd let Reform in, you'd let these sort of more extreme right wing parties into power. Yes, we probably would. But the point is that if there are people who for whom that party speaks, then they should be represented in Parliament. And chances are they will never, ever be a majority party. They would never be in a position where they would be in the driving seat in order to form a government. But to be honest, if they were, then that would be because people had voted for them. And that's democracy. So
Yeah,
I
I
don't
agree entirely.
I never I've sort of got zero time for that argument. I think if you want a voting system that offers representation to every single person and means that more people are likely to vote and means that more people feel represented, that's a great thing. There isn't a downside to that as far as I'm concerned.
I agree entirely, and I think when people talk about um, getting hijacked by extremist parties, you only have to look at the government and, and this increasingly swing to the right. That's completely not the same as the manifesto that people voted for, even under an unrepresentative system. And so I think it's not that
Mm.
right wing parties aren't in parliament; it's they're very much controlling the government. It just isn't what people
Yeah.
necessarily voted for. I
And
think
they're very
on the
much
flip side,
controlling the message, and they're very much controlling the message, and they've been controlling the agenda. I mean, we wouldn't have even had a Brexit vote had it not been for UKIP and Nigel Farage banging on and on about it. I mean, the only reason we had a referendum was because David Cameron wanted to uh, uh, squash the threat from UKIP. You know, so you may as well have them inside the tent rather than outside.
and we saw how much more people were engaged with politics during the referendum. And I think it was a
Mm.
sense, even the people who weren't politically engaged, that for once their vote would count because it was either Remain or it was Leave. And it was that sense of it wasn't going to be winner. Well, it was going to be winner takes all, but there were only two options here. So there was no sense of a wasted vote or your vote wouldn't count. Everyone had that sense that when they turned up, their vote was going to count. Whereas we know
Yeah.
for the vast majority of constituencies in the UK, they very rarely change hands. We hear the talk about safe seats all the time. And I think that
Yeah.
that term safe seats has also led to the lobbying that we've seen in politics, because a lot of politicians don't have to, or have previously not had to worry about their seats so much. And so they've had, flagrant abuses of political power, and where they've accepted money from and donors in a way that if their seat had been at risk, they probably wouldn't have done that. But it just kind of encourages this
Yeah.
bad behavior where people don't feel like they're held accountable.
Yeah.
On the positive side, though, because those are all the negatives, I think it's really important that progressives get behind PR. There's lots of evidence suggests that your carbon emissions as a country across the world under a PR system are reduced by 18%. Your chance of going to war are much more likely. And I don't think that's because PR is a magic bullet. It certainly isn't. But it just means that democratic decisions are made across a more diverse
Mm.
group of voices,
Yeah.
which means
And
that
by
your decision. Yeah,
consensus. Yeah,
exactly.
it's proper grown-up politics, isn't it? It's there has to be serious negotiations. There has to be some give and some take. And that's the politics that I want to see, rather than this adversarial shouting at each other across the dispatch box that we see week in, week out. It's completely counterproductive, I think. But the one thing that I think depresses me more than anything, if I'm out canvassing around the village, is people who say to me, "What's the point in voting?" And that really makes me sad, that there are a great swathe of people who just will not bother turning up and voting, because especially when they're in a safe seat, or they perceive it as a safe seat, because what's the point? What's the point? Because your vote is just going to go into the bin. We're back to that first visual analogy that I gave. Where I live, my MP is Michael Gove, and for best part of 40 odd years, it's been a very safe Tory seat. It's not anymore, but it has been. And if I was a Labour voter, actually, I was when I lived in London, I was a Labour voter and then a Green voter after Iraq, because I couldn't bring myself to vote for Labour after Iraq. But when I moved here, um, I did my homework. I looked up which party was in who's best placed to beat Michael Gove, and it's the Lib Dems. And so I just threw myself into it, because that's what you have to do if you want to get rid of the Tory who's in a safe seat. You just have to get behind the candidate who is best placed to beat them. And I've tactical voted, so I've been tactical voting for as long as I've had to tactical vote. And that's the other issue, is that people shouldn't have to tactical vote. People should be able to vote for the party that they want to vote for. And it just seems perverse to me that we have a system where it's basically sort of all the progressive people sort of going, right, okay, who are we voting for this time? And that's it. That's our system. It's like, okay, where you live, who the heck do we vote for? And then there's never any real clear indication, because obviously when come elections, Labour will be saying, no, it's us, and Lib Dems will be going, no, it's us. And voters don't know who to vote for, but they know they don't want the Tory.
So the issue I have with tactical voting is I don't think voting Labour can ever be considered a tactical vote in the current circumstances. I know that people want to get rid of the Conservatives, but it's the Labour Party who support the current first past the post system. It's the Labour Party that are supporting the child welfare cap. It's the Labour Party who haven't called for a ceasefire in Gaza, along with the government. So I just think if the point of tactical voting is to get the Conservatives out, it's never made sense to me to then vote for the Labour Party who support a first past the post system, because effectively it is a vote to maintain the current system and a vote for a future government.
I kind of think it's been the eternal hope that they will change the voting system, isn't it? Because we know that the Conservatives will never change the voting system, and that there is some glimmers of hope now with Labour, given that party members I think I'm right in thinking that they voted to support PR
By over 80%, yeah.
Yeah.
and the trade union as well.
So that is a big shift. That's a big shift. The question is going to be whether or not a Labour government see that through.
Well, so I agree it's a big shift, and I'm always keen to praise Labour members who were involved with that because a lot of them have done an immense amount of work. However, I think it almost demonstrates even more the problem that a Labour membership have now said they want PR. Most of the trade unions have said they want PR, but Keir Starmer within 24 hours just said no. That was the end of that conversation. And I just think that shows how big the rift that is now, that before he could at least say, well, I'm Labour Party leader, my members don't want it. And I disagreed with that position, but he's entitled to have that position.
Has he given any
But
sort of reasoning as to why he is against it? Has he actually explained his position on PR, or is it just more? Because I do get the sense that Labour are going into this next election with a sort of "don't spook the horses" attitude. It's like you can smell the terror from here that they're going to muck it up before they get the win. So I kind of feel like they've gone really vanilla to lead into the next election in order to win it, rather than being a bit bold, like on Brexit. I mean, you won't get a Labour MP who'll talk about Brexit now. And maybe it's the same with PR, that they're just sort of avoiding these big sea change items that could be in their manifesto, in an attempt to be as inoffensive as possible to as many people in order to win.
I think that's right, but I'd argue if the horses are running towards the cliff edge, then it's time to speak the horses.
I'm with you on that.
Yeah. So there's definitely some contradiction here. Keir Starmer, when he ran for leadership, said that our electoral system was broken and that it needed changing. And at first past the post, I think the words he used, that need to double check this, are not fit for purpose. But then after the PR vote, he absolutely said no to that. It's curious because he could have said no, that's not one of my priorities, but he just said no, it won't be, in the manifesto, and it's not something he's going to do. Now, I think there's certainly a role there for the Lib Dems and the Greens and the SNP, that whatever a minority parliament looks like, everyone has to stand absolutely united in that PR has to be a red line. And that can't be up for negotiation with ministerial cards or whatever it might be. PR has to absolutely be, whether it's supplier confidence or whatever it is, PR has to be a red line there, I think. I think it's also worth mentioning in this conversation, because it always gets brought up, that PR is not a panacea, but nothing ever is. And there are countries with PR that still have fundamental problems with inequality and social injustice, Italy, Israel, for instance. But I think it's also fair to say that without PR, you can't tackle social injustices sustainably. So it's not that it fixes everything, but without it, you can't begin to fix the other things because it's so pervasive in everything.
So if Labour win and it's not in their manifesto that they're going to introduce PR, what do we do?
So I think partly this is what I'm intending to do now, that it's about making the bigger case for PR. So in my mind, I'd make this argument for the Green Party, but I imagine Lib Dem leadership would make a similar argument for the Lib Dems, that even in seats where we don't win, every single vote across the country is a vote in terms of the Green Party for climate injustice, to tackle social inequality, and yes, a vote for proportional representation. So this would be my argument against tactical voting in some ways too, or certainly not tactical voting for parties that don't support PR. Because in 2017, the Green Party stood aside in 2019 in lots of seats, and that really affected our vote share. I think it was the right thing to do to try and reach consensus at that time, but the Labour Party did not come to the table. So if they're refusing to come to the table, I think the best way we can win PR now is to win it at the ballot box, and by voters across the whole country getting behind parties that support PR and refusing to support parties that don't. So I hear your question is about after the election, but for me, it has to start even sooner than that, because I just think,
I mean, I'm all for that. I'm all for that. The thing that concerns me is that the system that we have at the moment, there will definitely be a large majority of seats, and especially across the southeast, where we will need people to vote for whoever isn't a Tory. So this is sort of the juggling act that we face. And in some seats, Labour will be in the best position to win it, and I would still prefer to have a Labour government than a Conservative government. Is there a danger if we are saying to people don't tactical vote anywhere, that we will be handing the Tories either, God forbid, another win, or do you think that means that a Labour majority will be reduced?
Yeah,
And
so
I'm all for the latter. I'm all for the latter, of course, because I think that the smaller the Labour majority is, then the more likely there is to be electoral change, which
this is a
means
complex.
looking at seats, certainly in the southeast. I don't know where the Greens have their greatest stronghold, but certainly London, I imagine, and the southeast. You should really be looking at the Greens and the Liberal Democrats.
Yeah, so for
Have
the
I
Greens,
got that right?
yeah, well, for the Greens, there's Bristol, there's Brighton, there's North Herefordshire, there's Waveney Valley. So
Yeah.
some of those are Labour facing, and one of them, or two of them, sorry, are Conservative facing. And I think people in the constituencies who are getting a targeted campaign will know where and when they can tactically vote. But I would like to think if there was a message to the country about what are they doing for their vote, I would always encourage people to vote with their heart and vote. You know, if proportional representation is important to them, if it's
Yeah.
important to see a change to the system, then they have to vote for a party that is going to change the system. I totally understand the attractiveness of the argument of saying, okay, well, we need to get rid of the Conservatives and then we'll worry about PR. But we've seen what Keir Starmer is like as a leader when he's not even in power. It is going to get a lot worse for him once he's in power and there is more pressure from the right wing media in particular, but also from this need to be seen as centre, which of course now is the right,
Well,
because we've
I mean,
shifted so much.
it's going to be interesting actually to see what the right wing press do, because I credit the right wing press as sort of being in Nigel Farage's pocket and that sort of that agenda,
Yeah,
and they do press the agenda of Farage and Richard Tice and all of that, and of course they are now pushing for PR quite
yeah,
hard, um, which is it's a horrible thing to be on the same side as Farage and Tice, but here we are. And I do wonder if they sort of get their tendrils back into the right wing press and the agendas that are set there, then it's entirely possible that they will be banging on at Keir Starmer to introduce it. But whether or not he will or not is another matter, of course.
yeah. I think with anything, it has to be about the quality of the argument, doesn't it? And if you're standing for the right thing and the integrity of your argument, and less about who is making that argument.
Mm.
Um, Again, I think that Farage and Tice have clearly had a pretty big grip on this country for a long
Yeah,
time without PR. So
yeah, they
I
have.
think the argument for PR is nevertheless there.
Yeah, agreed.
I'm aware it's 2 minutes to two. I don't know if you have to jump into anything else, or is there anything we've not talked about that you think, oh, I really want to say that?
No, I think we covered most things, didn't we? We got to the meat of it. We've said more people will vote. We've said about consensus-based politics, and just looking at my notes, more diverse
Oh,
parliaments. We've touched that. Tactical
could
voting, of course, big one.
could I add? I think you'll be on the same page as us, Emma, but I'm
Yeah,
interested. That it's not just about PR either, although that's the main thing. But I'd love to see votes for 16-year-olds. I'd love to see a reform
yeah.
of the House of Lords, so that
So would
much kind of
I.
broader range of electoral reform as well.
Yeah, me too. I'm absolutely full square behind votes for 16-year-olds, and the House of Lords is a joke. It's got
And
to
it
be
sometimes
reformed.
gets used as a distraction from PR, and I
Yeah,
don't think that should be instead of PR. But
yeah,
I think PR is absolutely the priority for the House of Commons, but also there should be a much wider look at are our democratic systems fit for
yeah.
purpose
Agreed.
and now. Cool. Thank you so much for your time, Emma. Really
My
appreciate it.
pleasure. My pleasure.